Welcome back to another session of EDI Wednesday, where we at the Institute for Equity University Center foreground issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion and social justice within organizations and society. We are absolutely delighted to be joined today by Annisha Taylor, Group Head of EDI at Ofcom and a fellow of the Institute for Equity
Brilliant.
University Center. Brilliant. Anisha, welcome.
I am. Yes. Thank you so much, Paul. It's amazing to be here. Thank you very, very much. And for the wonderful intro.
No, absolutely. I think it's so important that we meet to discuss these important things. Many of the guests that we've had in our studio come and talk to us about equity issues in education. So we're particularly excited this morning to be talking about equity issues in businesses. But before we get into this kind of heavy discussion around what that looks like or what it could look like or what it should look like, I'm going to cede the floor to you, Anisha, for you to just say a word or two of introduction about yourself so our audience and our viewers can know a little bit about you in your own words.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So as Paul said, Annisha Taylor, so currently head of EDI, so Quality, Diversity and Inclusion at Ofcom. I'm still relatively new to my role, so kind of the world of communications regulations. I've been there 7 months because previous to that I was the group head of diversity, inclusion and belonging at the BBC. However, my kind of main, career really is from a kind of retail background. So I spent 18 years at the John Lewis Partnership. Predominantly kind of HR and operational roles, and then the last kind of stint of my career, probably the last 4 or 5 years, again then operating in the kind of the D&I EDI space there. So yeah, really really excited for this conversation. As you mentioned, honorary fellow at the institute, so really keen to share my knowledge, also learn from the fantastic work that you and the institute are doing, and yeah, do what I can to help. That's me.
Fantastic,
Thanks.
fantastic. We are so delighted to have you. And with such substantive work history in business and industry, I think you're the right person for us to lead this conversation. So, Anisha, equity issues in business. What should we be concerned with?
Yeah, do you know, it was really interesting. I think the first thing, and that's a great question, is people's, I guess, lack of understanding of what equity even means. And there's always, I'm in many a conversation where I find myself having to articulate what we mean when we say equity in business. People often confuse equity with equality. So even, if I take my job title, so as you did, I shorten it to head of EDI, and people sometimes assume that it's equity, but actually for me, it happens to be equality. So, really helping people understand that obviously from an equality perspective, it's about giving everyone the same resource, for example. But obviously from an equitable perspective, it's about allocating resources in a fair way because of, I guess people's starting point and what they have accessible to them. So I think that for me is a really important distinction, and something that people really overlook. I think the second thing is there's always, when people do kind of get to that level of understanding, there tends to be a sense of, oh, okay, so you're going to take something away from this person over here and give it to this person over here. And I think it's really important to help organizations, leaders to understand that it's not about taking something away from someone to give to someone else. It's about really looking at your data, using your data to understand who has what, whether that be your people data or, output from a colleague survey that gives you an idea of how people are experiencing kind of life within your organization, or, things around recruitment or, promotions, bonuses, anything like that helps you determine who is, like I said, who's experiencing what within your organization, how are they kind of flowing through the process, and is there any kind of disproportionate impact? I think that for me is the important baseline that people need to get to ensure that you are, I guess, moving from equality into equity, because both are important, but obviously today we're specifically focusing on equity. So yeah.
And these things that you're sharing are so fundamental to creating that sense of belonging because if
Mm.
organizations don't have this data and don't have an understanding, a serious grasp of this data, what the data is saying, then the outcomes that they can achieve, um, they are at risk of not achieving those because people will become disillusioned or could become disillusioned in those workspaces. So I think you've hit something on the head there, that leaders need to really come to that place of understanding. And how can we help leaders to do this?
Yeah, another good question. I think it's about understanding that it's not just a moral imperative, it's a business imperative as well. So, it impacts exactly as you said, how and whether or not, your staff feel like they belong, feel like they're included. Um, and I think it's therefore important for businesses to embed the equity in everything they do, the innovation, performance reviews to ensure that your people want to be there, because otherwise they start speaking with their feet and they start walking out the door, um, resigning because they don't feel like it's a space for them. It's not, they don't feel like potentially that they can come to work and kind of. I was almost going to say something that I'm not in agreement with. So there's a lot of talk about bringing your whole self to work. I don't necessarily agree with that because I think that not everyone is afforded the opportunity to bring the whole self to work. So it's about bringing the version, the professional version of yourself that is most suited to the environment that you are working in. And actually, even within that, if people aren't given the same opportunities and, as I said, resources that everyone else is, they're not going to want to do that. And then ultimately, they feel like they don't kind of belong in that space. So yeah, so it's a tough time, as we all know. So it's about not, I think it's, for me, it's about helping organizations, C-suite leaders understand that it's ultimately about fairness and respect, right? So you can label it whatever you want to label it, but it's just around everyone feeling that they have the same opportunities. And as I said, bearing in mind any kind of disproportionate impact. So your starting line. So what's your base point? So actually, if this is your starting line and you've got people down here, what do you need to do to address the people that sit in that gap to bring them up to here? That's the bit that I think that it's important for leaders to understand, that in terms of what that looks like, how it manifests within the organization.
But in this current economic environment,
Mm,
um, leaders um, are not as enthusiastic in some cases around this agenda. In fact, let us be frank,
mm,
many leaders were never interested and enthusiastic in this agenda before. So the economic environment has given them a fodder, um,
mm,
to use as a sort of a, an excuse or a way to hide behind this work. But
mm.
isn't it the case that because of the economic environment that we're living in, this work becomes even more critical?
It does. It absolutely does become more critical, but sadly, also due to the economic environment, it tends to be the thing that is often overlooked or kind of deprioritized because
Mm,
this is nothing new. Anything linked to kind of people with a capital P and HR or anything like that is deemed as a kind of it's a nice to have, the pink fluffy stuff, and it's less of a kind of strategic objective for organisations.
mm,
What I do think actually has happened, said that, and this is almost going to sound a bit like a contradiction, but because of the difficult time we're experiencing in terms of cost of living crisis or economic climate, there's something about organizations understanding that how do you keep or build your kind of competitive advantage. So, and that's not just to do with your product and your output, it's to do with how productive your staff are, how who are you attracting, how are you attracting them, are you even attracting people, like what does your employer brand look like. If I go onto Glassdoor and I start looking up your organization, am I going to see really good things from your staff, or am I going to see negative things? What does your website look like? Are you kind of shouting about equality, diversity, and then actually internally the messaging is very different? So I think those are the things that people are becoming really attuned to, in the sense of, like you said, this is, or as I said, it's easy to just kind of forget about this stuff and deprioritize it. But it's what's important to your staff. What do you want them to think? How do you want them to feel? How do you want them to react to when you say this is our EDI strategy, or this is our, you know, talent attraction process, how does that all align? And are you telling the kind of same consistent story, or are you saying one thing externally and acting a particular way, and then actually as a new recruit potentially you kind of walk in the door, you sit down and you think, oh well, this is slightly different to the experience that kind of was portrayed to me as an external person kind of looking in. And that's the bit that I feel like is the sweet spot that, people like me in my positions, and HR and employee experience and well-being managers, it's important for us to really kind of hammer home that messaging is around, like I said, not just your business output and your kind of operationally, but you've got to think about your people. They are the heart of your organization. If your people aren't there doing the thing you need them to do in a way that you need them to do it, the whole thing's fall down, right? And I think, like I said, we just need to help people, organizations understand that shouldn't be the first thing that just goes by the wayside because of any financial constraint that you might find yourself under.
But can I push you a little bit? And I think all of what you're saying
Yeah.
makes really good sense. And so we're moving the
Mm.
discussion then from the individual to the institution,
Hmm.
um, and now we're taking it to the social. In the UK, um, we have seen this crusade of hate, this crusade of racism, this crusade of transphobia, homophobia, religious hate, and all kinds of
Hmm.
things to do with disability and disability hate and all of that kind of thing. It's almost like in the
Mm.
UK we have become a melting pot for hate rather than
Yeah.
rather than a space where all people can belong and all people can thrive. And this is really, really problematic in not
Mm.
only in how I'm articulating it, but in also what what our society has found, where our society has found itself. And but but the businesses are microcosms of societies, of our
Yeah.
society, and the
Yeah.
individuals are the ones that make up the business. So it's not the businesses are not the four walls. It's the individuals, the people, the leaders, and
Mm.
so on. So aren't we then in a situation of catch 22, where how can we expect businesses to change this problem when business leaders and the people are products of their environment?
That is a really good challenge. And yes, and you're right. And yeah, I do agree with what you said. I think almost kind of my challenge back would be around, particularly as a leader, right? It's about how you show up and the behaviors and the mindset and the mentality that you are role modeling within your organization, which hopefully is aligned with your business goals, your business values, your mission, your purpose, your strategy, whatever it might be. So I would like to think and I would hope that if there are leaders that exist out there who have a particular view of a particular group of people or a person based on their identity, their background, their whatever, their social circumstance, that isn't being factored into their decision making process and the equitable decisions that are made that have a big impact on the whole organization. Now let's be real. We know that that's not always the case. Okay, there are things that seep in, whether it be bias, whether it be discrimination. But again, I'd like to think that collectively, as the senior leadership team, as the C-suite, as a board, that there's enough people who have a voice and a seat at the table who are able to kind of call out some of that behavior and who are able to kind of challenge and say, well, that's not our kind of collective view, and from a leadership team, this is not what we would expect to see, to hear. This is not how we want to run our operation. We, and again, it comes back to the data. How aware are the C-suite of the representation within the organization? Which sounds like a really strange thing to say, right? But I think we're all too quick to take groups of people, or actually individuals. We're all too quick to take individuals as what we see at face value, right? So people look at me and they can see, okay, yes, I'm a woman, and yes, I'm black. Other than that, you don't know who I am and what I'm about. You're going to make your assumptions and you're going to make your guesses by how I'm dressed, how I speak, if you happen to know where I live, or, my kind of social circumstance, whether the fact that I've got children, or am I married, or am I, self-employed, or what. those are the things that make us who we are, right? The human difference. Okay. And to your point, it's the differences in everyone that is causing the divide that we're seeing at the moment, right? And what we're experiencing. And it's about helping others understand how to embrace that, right? So again, when I go back to the C-suite and who's got a seat at the table, if there are, thoughts, opinions that are creeping into the boardroom, into how we run our business, into how we support our staff, how we, like I said, recruit, promote, retain, whatever it is, again, it comes down to kind of your moral imperative and business values. Is there alignment? If someone is there who's not aligning to what we are, what we say, who we say we are, and how we want to kind of, be portrayed from a business perspective, well, then someone has to, say something, make a change, highlight it, call it in or out, whichever way you want to do it, because we're reliant on the leaders, right? They are the leaders of the organization. And yes, we know we can sometimes have homogenous groups of people, right? Which is why things like, the course that you do at the center is really important to help people understand the human difference, different perspectives, diversity of thought, different opinions that are being brought to the table that will positively impact our product design, our policies that we put out, the way that we include different subsets of society. So I guess back to your original question, that all exists, right? Yes, individuals have their own, own opinions. We're humans, right? We are hardwired to run towards what we know, run away from what we don't. Okay, and that is some of what we're seeing in society at the moment. But my hope for humanity is that collectively, there's enough people at the table who do have the wherewithal to question any exclusive behaviors and thoughts and mindsets that are kind of being surfaced within those kind of business settings. Hopefully that answered your question. That was yeah.
Fascinating, no, fascinating contribution. That takes us right up against a short break, but what I hear coming through is leadership and ethos. Leaders can set the ethos of their organization. Leaders can shape the
Mm-hmm.
culture of their organizations. But to do this, leaders have to be intentional, and leaders have to show a clear commitment to social justice. But I also hear you saying leaders need to understand intersectionality within data, but also not leaders people, and also cultural competence. We are all very
Yeah.
different, and also celebrate instead of weaponize human difference. I
Mm.
like that notion
Mm.
of
Yeah.
celebrating human
And that
difference.
and
Um,
Yeah, and that's where again I come,
coming,
and I will always, and that's where it comes kind of back to the data, because again, when I talked about the assumptions that you make when you look at a person or a group of people, don't make the assumption. Like, look and understand and interrogate and analyze your data. What is the representation of your organization? Because
mm,
actually, that obviously that's what you should be using to base um, your I was going to say your programs and initiatives. It shouldn't just be your programs. It should be everything. It should be the basis of
mm,
how you support your staff, how, like I said, how you nurture them, and how you ensure that they are provided with the environments that they need to come to work and thrive and be productive. A
mm,
previous organisation that I worked at had an ethos of, when creating anything or designing anything that was due to kind of support the whole organization or groups of people, was nothing about us without us. You can't sit in a
mm,
room and design a program or a system or a process or a policy for a group of people when none of you are represented in that space, and think that you're going
mm,
to get it right. You have to bring them into
mm,
the conversation, whether that be before, during, or after. You consult, you ask questions, you kind of give a first draft. Is this suitable? Is this actually going to support you, or have we gone off on a complete tangent and going down the wrong route? And that's what it's about. Again, data. It always comes back to your data.
absolutely. And who is at the table, and creating
Mm.
ladders of access for people. My producer is going to be very annoyed with me, so we must take a short break. But fascinating
Yes.
conversation we're having here about intentionality. Nothing for us without us, intersectionality, cultural competence. Quick break, producer. Let's hear from our sponsors.
My friends, welcome to the Institute for Equity University Center. I want to talk to you a little bit about our institutional support package. Many of you have heard me talk before about our training package, but not so much about our institutional support. In our institutional support package, we do a lot of audits, curriculum audits, policy audits, textual and material audits. So we audit books for publishers and for organizations that want to produce material. This is another area of our work that we want you to get involved with. If you're doing a research project and you want somebody to sit on your board as your project advisory board, or if you are just thinking about embedding EDI in your organization and you're unsure, make us your accountability partner. We will sit with you, we'll hold hands with you, we will walk with you and walk beside you through the process as partners in the great struggle and the great opportunity.
Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. What a fantastic and fascinating conversation we've been having with Annisha Taylor, Group Head of EDI at Ofcom and Fellow of the Institute for Equity University Center. Annisha has reminded us of the importance of people data, but also people experiences, also the moral and the business imperative for EDI within all kinds of businesses and also C-suite businesses. The importance of fairness and respect, the importance of looking at data intersectionally, the importance of cultural competence, the importance of acknowledging and valuing instead of weaponizing human differences, the importance of leadership, having a clear commitment to social justice and that whole notion of nothing for us without us, and also the importance of having clear accountability frameworks. We are going to talk a little bit more about the accountability frameworks, and I want to ask follow-up question before we delve into that. Anisha, in when George Floyd was murdered and many organizations took to this EDI work like ducks to water,
Mm,
for want of a better
mm,
expression, many of them devised statements of intents. Many of those statements of intents have now disappeared from websites. Some
mm.
have remained. And for those that have remained, how can we help organizations to move from statement of intent to statements of activism?
Really good question. I think the first bit to recognise is that when George Floyd was murdered, it there was a the way I describe it is a bit of a like social awakening, right? Because these things that wasn't the first time it's happened, um, and it happens all over the world, right? What it did is it highlighted it. Obviously, it was COVID times; everyone was at home watching telly, kind of really kind of absorbing it, taking it all in. And I guess from an organizational perspective, it forced people to go, oh, okay, this is big. It's impacting people regardless of who you are and who what your background is. We have to be seen to be addressing what this has done for us, for the country, for society, for everything. Right, is the first thing. Yes, there were EDI, DNI, whatever other acronym you want to put in it, roles and group teams that existed at the time, but they, to my understanding and to my knowledge, they were not operating in the way that they are operating today, right? In terms of remit, budget, resource, headcount, all that thing, it just wasn't, okay? So it felt as though there was a real scramble to sort of go, oh gosh, wow, we need to be paying more attention to it, and we need to be putting more of a spotlight onto it. So and I remember very vividly at the time there was a huge spike in EDI roles, whether it be heads of leads, specialists, all that sort of stuff. And there was a period of time where the focus was on race, and for the reason of George Floyd's murder. Then what happened, I think it was almost like the kind of 6 months that followed after that, it then kind of moved to, then there was kind of like looking at the other characteristics, so there was a I saw quite a lot of, like disability needs, neurodivergent needs, trans needs, LGBT kind of focus, which again, absolutely needed, valid, must, should have happened. But what I feel like that did, and that kind of, and a little bit of a knee-jerky reaction, was little thought given to, okay, why are we doing this? What's the purpose, long-term, medium, kind of term, long, medium, short-term, purpose of us having an EDI team, or putting out the black square, or having a strapline or a strategy, or whatever you want to call it. And that's the work that I don't feel was done authentically at the time. Okay, because people were really worried and really nervous about even the length of time that it took for people, for example, to put the black squares up on social media, right? There was a lot of conversation about, aren't you great because you did it on the first day, and actually you're not so great because it took you 3 days to put out the black square, or to put out your internal or external statement. Because that was the other thing, there was a real, do you just say something internally and kind of address it to your black staff and obviously kind of send it out all wide? Do you put something out, very publicly to show your kind of your intent, your commitment? Those are all the things that I felt just tied people up in knots, right? I'll be honest. And then you kind of fast forward to today, and as you referenced within the question itself, there is a different focus, right, when it comes to EDI, because the momentum has disappeared quite some. There's not the focus that exists at the moment. People have kind of forgotten about the injustice that they saw very, openly and vividly on your screen, and it's almost like, okay, well, things have got back to normal. Surely it's not as bad as that, because we haven't seen that it's happened again, and that has impacted, and almost kind of there's been a trickle effect up and down, in the sense of, from a business perspective, how we should address it and pay attention to it, resource it, and all that kind of stuff that comes with it, because of the fact that it doesn't feel like it's as an important topic at the moment, right? Then again, today we see what you referenced in your introduction about how the things that are happening around the world and the impact that it's having on particular groups of people, but just all of us as society and humanity. And there are a lot of questions around, well, and what and so what? You said you were going to do this. You went out with your big statement. You had your strategy, but how is that translated? And yes, there has been some great work. There's been some huge wins, but like you said, in terms of the translation into the action, there's work to do.
How can we make organizations and leaders more accountable then? Because that seemed to me there's a crisis of accountability, or a gap between intent and action and accountability. How can we make leaders and organization more accountable for this work? And also some of them that are genuinely doing it from a good place.
Yeah. And it's, it's an interesting question. And when, even the way in which you've asked it, like, how can we, there's something about the internal questions that need to be asked. So, the expectation is, and I know that this has happened, there have been organizations where, for example, the Race Network have reached out to the C-suite and said, what we saw in 2020 was this, and this. You said you're going to do this and this, but actually we're not seeing it, we're not feeling it. Where are we at? What are you going to do? So there's that approach, which is go straight to them and sort of call it out and say that, I know you said we were going to do X, Y, and Z. We haven't. What can we expect to see, and how can we support you into getting there? So there's that. There's calling it out. There's, again, looking at your data to say, this is where we were at that point in time. This is where we are now. This is still the gap that exists in the middle. And actually, what are we going to do to address it, right? And when those questions are being asked, I think it's important to not just come with, pointing the finger, what are you doing, what you're doing, if possible, to come with the solutions, right? Because let's face it, and I don't want to just tar everyone on the same brush, but the reason why this hasn't been addressed is because there's a lack of understanding as to how to address it. How do we actually, to your point, get from talking to action, right? Organizations are stuck in a place of, we want to do it, we know it's the right thing to do, we just don't know how to actually put it into action. Because then you've got to factor in other groups of people in terms of how they identify and their thoughts and views, and kind of optically what it looks like if another one group is being seen to be getting support or extra resource, or being given a mentor or being sponsored. But there's that whole then divide that then comes up internally around, well, am I not as kind of valued as you then? And that is another kind of angle that, from a leadership perspective, that they need to address. Because again, this goes back to my point about, it's not about taking something away from me to give it to you. It's about supporting everyone from where they are right now. So I don't know. I feel like I haven't answered your question in a way, because, wow, it's something that I think all of us in this space are trying to get to the bottom of. How do we
Some
really get to that point of making a tangible change?
some of the work that we have done in the institute, and this is the final question that we have got time for, um, is some impact evaluation work. We've done
Yeah.
some of this work with the Metropolitan Police. We have done some of this work with the Church of England, and so on. Many organizations are doing this work, but they are not evaluating the impact of their intervention. And we know within EDI, there's a lot of low trust and no trust. And what would you say to organizations that are not putting funding into impact evaluation?
What would I say? Yeah, that's a good question. Well, how do you know what you're doing is working if you're not, if you're not attaching, what many organisations I've worked for have called an equality impact assessment, or your statement from the start. How do you know what it's doing? Is it just a huge waste of money and time and resource? Again, what's your baseline? What's your starting point? You need to know that whatever it is that you're creating, the impact that it's going to have on your kind of staff population, right? If you don't do that, you risk ostracizing, excluding certain groups of people. Okay. Again, data. It comes back to it. It's not difficult to realize that if you're putting in a policy that states X, Y, and Z. Okay, so all those people who currently sit within this bucket, what does it mean for them? Okay, are they going to be are they going to be supported by this, or is it actually going to make their working lives more difficult by doing that? And it could be things like, as we're seeing, a lot of people are mandating people being in the office sort of 2-3 days a week. What does that mean for people that are carers, people that have different responsibility at home, whether that be parental or anything else, just people who've disabled? If you don't know, you're literally kind of throwing something out there and just hoping for the best, and then not taking any regard for the impact it's going to have. And like I said, comes back to inclusion and belonging, doesn't it? And whether or not people actually are going to continue on working for you. So equality impact assessments are important, just like your measurable goals, your milestones, your targets that you have in place. It's something that you can have to track what it is that you're doing. Is it working? Is it helping you to get to your long-term goal? Or is it something that you're just doing because you want to be seen to be doing the right thing, and it's just a bit of a tick box exercise, which again is what we see quite a lot of.
Fascinating. That's all we have got time for, except for some quick fire questions. But before we ask you the quick fire questions, just an opportunity to summarize some of the critical points shared with us this morning. So much in what you've said, Annisha. Social awakening and people not understanding the remits, or the budget is not there, or enough attention isn't being paid, or people not understanding the why of the work. What is the purpose of this work that we are doing? So why are we doing the work? And what are we trying to achieve? And I think organizations need to continue asking themselves that at the design stage of the work. Why are we doing this? What are we hoping to achieve? And this notion that we need to move and start designing impact evaluations at the point of designing some of this work. So we know, as you say, how do you know that if it's working if you're not doing any impact evaluation? And so then our organizations, and this is a four-part framework that I'm going to propose to organizations just listening to you. So you'll hear it first here on EDI Wednesday. We have to start with the intent, then move to the action, then move to the accountability, and then move to the impact measure. Quick fire questions, Annisha, before we round us out here. what's your favorite country in the world?
Jamaica. That's my heritage. That's my background. Yeah, of everywhere I've been in the world, I feel most comfortable there, and I
What's your
love
favorite?
all of the food.
Yeah, brilliant. What's your favorite four-letter word?
Kind.
Kind.
Mm.
Fantastic. And what was your last Google search?
Skateboarding birthday parties for 8-year-olds because it's my son's birthday this month.
Many congratulations to your son. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, from wherever the world that you joined us this morning for this session, we want to thank you. Fascinating and riveting discussion with Annisha Taylor, Group Head of EDI at Ofcom, the communications regulator here in the UK. Producer, thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you.